This is going to be my video on manual conversion on a late 99 7.3 liter Powerstroke. I'm going to try and keep it as condensed as possible and try to include tips and tricks that I had a hard time finding on forums, etc., that I had to figure out myself in the past, and would have made it far easier if I had had a video to show me those things, like, for example, the differences between a 99 to 2001 truck and a 2002 and 2003 truck. There are some things you'll need to know as far as trans harness goes, ECM, etc., etc. There's a couple of wiring modifications that'll need done on the 99 to 2001 trucks. That's just to satisfy the manual ECM with the coolant temp sensor that's missing on the auto truck that the manual truck has. So yeah, that's going to be included in this video. I'm not a Ford or pickup technician by any means. I'm a heavy duty mechanic, third year apprentice currently, but I've done these swaps in the past, so I've figured out a thing or two about it. Now the truck we're going to do the swap on here today, or start today at least, is this late 99 7.3 liter Powerstroke of mine. It's got 260,000 kilometers on it. It's been my daily driver for over a year now. With the auto transmission, I'm just not a big fan of it, so that's why it's getting the manual transmission. Now I'm not going to get super in depth with the removal of the automatic transmission because it's just like any other auto tranny removal. What I like to do in this case first though is start with pulling the seats and the carpet back. It's just got some trim on the sides here that kind of come out, then the carpet folds back out of the way. Then obviously you're going to have to cut the hump out first. But the reason I do this is because it makes it easy to get at various different wiring connectors, etc. Bell housing bolts. You see there's the top two there, 3, 4, 5, 6, makes it very easy to get at those versus trying to do it from down below just to have to cut out the hump later on anyways. So that's just my opinion on that. Let's carry on. Get the torque converter drained first of all, because I don't want to have to deal with pulling tranny and a bunch of ATF falling out of the torque converter just in case it slips out. I always try to avoid that happening just because you don't really want the seal to be reused once removed, but doing it this way, if it does happen to slip out, like said, not desirable, then at least there isn't like 4 liters of ATF inside of it. Now when the time comes to pull the T-case out, the bolts are all kind of blocked up by this heat shield here. It goes over the exhaust all the way along. And it's really annoying when you're trying to pull the tranny out too, because the tranny will hit this. So what I usually like to do is just pull all these bolts out. There's 2 there, 2 there, 2 there. Pull that whole heat shield out. And I usually just leave it out because I've never been able to see a use for it. It's not even metal or anything, so it can't get that hot. So that's the T-case out. And that's the bracket cut off so that the hanger can still be used. So I got my floor jack under there now. I got this block of wood I cut up with the old Stihl chainsaw real quick. Ratchet strap around it to try to make sure it doesn't fall and kill me. So let's get her out of there. Alrighty, so that's the tranny out. Had to jack up this corner a little bit to get enough clearance to pull it out from under the frame rail, but not much mess at all. There she be. As you can see, I tie wired the torque converter just to ensure that it doesn't slip out the front. Alright, so flex plate's off. Now what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to pull this spacer plate this spacer plate for the automatic tranny that the starter bolts to, etc. There's that off. And then there's this spacer collar on the end of the crank nose. You're gonna have to pull that off. I'm gonna be replacing my rear main seal as well, because as you can see it's weeping a little bit. These dowels are longer. That's fine. We'll just stick through the end of these holes here. So going from an automatic to a manual, you don't have to worry about it. But if you're going from a manual to an auto, then you want to install the longer centering dowels. So that's flywheel mounted up. The spacer shim for the manual transmission, it's got the hole for the starter in the side there. The roll pin was the same, and this shim, I guess you could call it, and the bolts are all the same, so those can just be reused. A little bit of blue Loctite and 89 foot-pounds of torque. Alright, that's the clutch installed and torqued. Used a little bit of blue Loctite on the bolts and torqued to 25 foot-pounds as per spec. Obviously go around and torque in sequence carefully. Right, so I've got my clutch fork in. I'm using the oversized pilot bearing, so I've got the sleeve on the crank nose, or on the input shaft nose. That's this kit here. That way, if the pilot bearing fails, it doesn't ruin the end of the input shaft. Got a new anchor on the end. The anchor is this guy here. It's cheap enough, so always replace it. And then with the clutch forks, you always want to make sure you've got the updated version. The original version was prone to cracking and breaking. The updated version, you can tell because these folds at the ends here aren't quite the same length. This one's longer. On the original version, they were both, I think, about that long and same length. So easy enough to tell, but something to keep an eye out for. Okay, that's bell housing bolts torqued. I like to clean the threads and apply some blue Loctite. Torque spec is 45 foot-pounds, so don't over torque them and make sure they don't come loose. Both of those things can cause a cracked bell housing, and you don't want that. So that's the starter installed. This is the 02 and 03 7.3 2-bolt starter. It's a gear reduction starter versus the original planetary starter. This one's lighter and it'll spin it faster. It's an upgrade for any truck that has the planetary starter on it. Planetary starter is far longer and heavier. It extends to about here, almost hitting the cross member, so I prefer this starter by far. I've built a new bell housing splash shield here. The old one was all cracked and broken up, so I built this out of heavier gauge metal, so it'll be less likely to crack around the bolts, etc. I had to swap out the trans mount here because the trans mount on my automatic was in far better shape. Just the rubber in the back here was cracked up on this ZF6, so I pulled this trans mount off of my auto and swapped it over. These bolts are Loctited in with red Loctite, so heat the aluminum around it, or else you just snap the head off of the bolt. These cross member, like the trans mount to cross member studs, just sit in the rear 2 holes, whereas on the automatic they sit in the front 2 holes. Flange is all cleaned up, ready for the transfer case flange gasket. That's this guy here. It's like $6, so why not replace it? I actually ended up reusing both my front and rear drive shafts. I've got probably about 1.5 inches of compression left in the slip yokes on both of them. Carrier bearing bolted right up. As you can see here, this slip yoke's probably 1.5 inches from full compression as well, and this isn't a lifted truck, so nothing that I'm worried about. I've got my manual transmission harness run. Up in the driver's side inner fender is where it connects up. Now this manual transmission harness here I got from the auto wreckers from a 2001 truck, because my parts truck is a 2002. Now, along with all the wiring changes and the digital odometer on the dash, they also changed the connectors for the transmission harness up there, so this only applies for 99 to 2001. The harness also connects up to the fuel pump here, running the fuel pump. Looped it down underneath the cross member here to the reverse switch on the transmission, and the 4x4 low switch on the T-case up there. Now, working from the top, because it's easier, taking out the air intake makes it a whole lot easier as well. There's two connectors here. This black one right there is what the manual trans harness plugs into. This gray one here is where the other connector on the automatic harness plugged into. The manual trucks do not have the gray connector, the automatics do. I'll show you what to do with that. Now, this is my old automatic transmission harness. On this end here was were the solenoids, well, relays for the power shift transfer case, which I've deleted. On the firewall end, or the fender well end of the harness, you've got the two connectors, the black and the gray, which I just showed you where they plugged in. You're gonna have to plug that, or cut that off of the automatic harness, and then there will be two wires that are larger than the rest of them. These two guys right here, you're gonna want to connect those up. That is your starter circuit for your neutral safety switch. When you're in neutral, it connects those two together to complete your circuit to your starter solenoid. And I like to solder them for situations like this, because you don't want to have to go back in there and deal with a bad connection down the road. So solder, shrink tube, and then your orange and black wire, I pulled that out of my old harness, and I'm going to be needing that for the coolant temp sensor I was telling you about. I'll show you what to do with that. Okay, so now with that gray plug reinstalled and those two wires tied together, the neutral safety switch for the automatic transmission is closed, so that's deleted, so to say. I've got my orange and black wire in this small loom. I just shrink tubed off the soldered connection, and then taped up the wires and ran this thin wire up here. Now, this is what's going to go to the coolant temp sensor that we're going to install, that the automatic truck doesn't have, that the manual ECM is going to be looking for. At this point, I'm swapping my ECM out. It sits just up here. You can see where the connector is. The easiest way to do it is just to pull this whole bracket out of the way. It's a bit of a crappy spot already, but believe me, it becomes a whole lot crappier once there's a clutch pedal in the way. So get that done now. So here I'm just swapping the Hydra chip from the old ECM, which is this NVK5, into my new one, which is my APX1. This is the automatic ECM that will not work with the manual transmission. This is the ECM out of my parts truck, which is for an 02. Again, will not work because of the wiring changes and the digital odometer, etc. So different instrument cluster. This ECM was one that I got from the wrecker. It's out of a 2001 truck, and it will work. So I'm going to be taking the Hydra, putting it in here, buttoning it back up, put it back in the truck. So at this point, the truck should start. The manual ECM's in. I reflashed the Hydra for the APX1. Dash lights are on good. Wait to start's on. Good sign. Moment of truth. Perfect. Yeah! And then there's the check engine lights on, and that's just because of that missing coolant temp sensor. Alright, so that's the master and slave in. You can see the slave down there, or the master I should say, and it's just a push in and then 1/8 of a turn to lock. The reservoir just sits right up there, and then the same thing down the bell housing. You just run the slave cylinder down to the bell housing, just push it in 1/8 of a turn to lock it in place. Clutch pedal's in place, and it works perfectly. Now if you look up at the top there, you can see my bolt where I did the heim joint modification. Right, where are we there? That's my bolt for the heim joint. If you don't know what that is, definitely look it up. You can buy them on Amazon. It's $35 for the kit. It deletes the plastic bushing in that pivot joint on the master push rod. And so you can kind of see the heim joint there. Far superior design. It's about $35 on Amazon, so definitely worth it. Before you put the clutch pedal in, I always like to take it apart, clean it up, and grease the bushings, because they like to wear out and screw up the bracket as well, and they're getting kind of hard to find these days. There's just the holes are already there. There's just a plastic piece that clips into the hole in the firewall for the master cylinder to click into the bracket there for the clutch pedal. So like I said, the holes are all there. Basically it's just 2 nuts on the bottom of the bracket on the inside there, if I can find a way to see them. There's those 2, and then 2 nuts on the engine side of the firewall as well. So there we go. Now with the brake pedal, it's wider, which is okay from the auto, but when you're pushing down the clutch pedal, you will tend to catch this little lip here, because you see they're pretty close. Tend to catch this lip here with the corner of your boot. So I'm just going to nip these off with the zip disc on the angle grind. Alright, so that's the brake pedal trimmed down, and I just put the pad on from one of my spare clutch pedals. As you can see, basically you can't tell the difference. It looks just like a manual truck now. It's a heck of a lot easier just to trim that down with a zip disc than to actually go and change the whole pedal assembly. So just put the dash back together again. The little panel here in the bottom, where normally on the automatic the readout is for drive, neutral, reverse, etc. There's just from the manual truck, there's a little plastic piece that clips into there. So just pull this whole bezel off, and then there's pull that piece out of the manual cluster and pop it into the automatic cluster. You'd never know the difference. On the column here, the shifter, automatic shifter assembly, just bolts up to this, so you just unbolt that. There's a couple of bolts underneath the column, kind of there, or nuts I should say, there and there. You just undo those 2 nuts, flop your whole column down out of the way, and then you can get at all of that. So just pull everything to do with the automatic off, and then this piece right here, this is your lock for the ignition switch. You can see that locks it in the accessory position, and then to put it, or not the accessory, but not the on position, but the off position, and then you push that to get it into lock position. The automatic doesn't have this, but the provisions are all in place in the steering column for it. So you just unbolt that from the manual truck, bolt it up. And then of course, if you have the column surround for the manual column, which is right here, there's the hole for that little lock right there, so fills that out nicely. So don't put the column surround on yet, because we're going to have to do something with this plug right here to make the cruise control work. Now this connector here on the automatic trucks goes to the wiring on the back of the shifter for your overdrive cancel button. Now when you hit your overdrive cancel, it kills the cruise control as well. And on the manual trucks, that same pin on the ECM is used to cancel cruise control if you push your clutch pedal down. So to make this wiring harness work with the manual ECM for the cruise control, you just take this connector here and cut it off the back of the wiring for the shifter, and then you connect your tan and light blue wire on this connector to a jumper wire, whatever color you have. I like to solder it because that wire is just so bloody thin, it's hard to get a good connection otherwise. And then you run that jumper down underneath to your clutch safety switch wiring. Now this block here, all the automatic trucks have this to bypass the starter circuit and the cruise control cancel circuit in the automatic trucks. On a side note, that little gray block is a good way to delete your clutch safety switch on any manual truck. Just go to the auto wrecker, get that little gray block out of an automatic truck and put it in your manual truck. Boom, clutch safety switch is deleted. So basically, like I said, tan and blue wire, run a jumper down to your tan and blue wire on your clutch safety switch wiring right there, and your cruise control will work properly. I'm just going to leave this gray block in place because the clutch safety switch isn't going to work with the heim joint mod. The clutch safety switch looks like this here, and it goes right onto here. But the problem is that that heim joint modification I've done, the end of this heim joint will run into the end of the plastic case on the clutch safety switch. So I'm just gonna leave it at the jumper block, and that way it's gonna function just like your clutch safety switch is bypassed. More reliable that way anyways. Okay, that's the column surround on. No more shifter. No more gear display. Very nice. Looking more like a manual all the time. Alright, so now let's tackle the coolant temp sensor issue. So there's that pesky little code right there, P0118. Engine coolant temperature circuit high input. And that's what that check engine light is all about right there. You might say, well, why am I worried about that P0118 code? Or maybe you'd say, that check engine light doesn't really bother me that much. With the coolant over temp code, the truck will actually derate. It will be basically undrivable, get terrible fuel mileage, no power, no boost, etc., etc. Now, I believe it's pin 37 on the ECM, monitors coolant temp on the manual trucks, and monitors trans temp on the automatic trucks. So I believe this is pretty much the same straight across the board for 7.3 Powerstroke trucks, at least in Superduties as far as I know. So this is that coolant temp sensor out of my parts truck and the pigtail for it. Now, pretty universal with Ford trucks. The sensors will be for the ECM monitor, and they'll be gray. The sender, which all the trucks, manuals and autos have, go to the cluster or the gauge, and it's going to be black. So you're going to need this gray coolant temp sensor and the pigtail for it. Now the sender pigtail with the black plug will not fit on this. These little barbs on the side here are in different locations, so you can't confuse them. So you're going to need the sensor and the pigtail. So on the manual trucks, I don't know why Ford did this, but this coolant temp sensor on the manual trucks from factory lives way down in there, and it's really quite hard to show you, but it's kind of down in underneath all this bracketry buried. I don't even know if I could find the port. It's really hard to get to. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put it right there on the side of the water pump. There's already an NPT plug. Get my sensor ready and boop. Okay, so we got the sensor in down there now. That's the gray connector for sender. I've extended the gray and red wire because it wasn't quite long enough. Now the gray and red wire is going to go to the gray and red on the exhaust back pressure sensor. That's this guy right down here. See how there's a gray and a red in the wiring for the exhaust back pressure sensor? It's the one with 3 wires. Now to figure this out, I actually had to pull the loom, or the wiring harness I should say, apart on the parts truck. And factory, that gray and red wire actually goes to the gray and red on the exhaust back pressure sensor. So now this is going to be just like factory. The yellow-red on the sensor harness here, or the sensor pigtail, is just going to go back up to this orange and black that goes to the trans harness. Now on the manual trucks, this wire here will just go back into this loom as well, run up the engine wiring harness, and then to the pin on the ECM. Now all we've done here is we've just bypassed it to the wire on the trans harness on the automatic wiring harness that goes back to that same pin on the ECM. So the ECM will never know the difference. Alright, there we go. That's loomed up. That's the exhaust back pressure sensor plugged back in. That's my new wires run and loomed up. There we go, that's the sensor down there. It's all clean, away from the belts. Good to go. Now that mod right there, as easy as it seems, took me a bit to figure out how to do it properly, because some of the forums I was reading, etc., people were saying to tie it into the common power wire, the common sensor power wire on the other coolant temp sensor, as in the sender, as in this guy right here. That is not correct. I tried that on the last truck I manual swapped and it didn't work. So just to be completely clear, exhaust back pressure sensor, it's right there. It's the one with 3 wires. That's the one with the gray red that you're going to wire that common power into, and then the signal's going to go to the orange black on the trans harness for the auto truck, and done deal. Alright, there we go. No more check engine light. She's happy. Let's see if our hydro works. Perfect. That's our high idle tune right there. Hydro works. Alright, I got my hump cut to shape. I've notched this out all the way down to the floorboard here. Reason for that is this part right here is a slightly different shape on the automatic truck. It's got an indentation, whereas on the manual truck there's no indentation here. So this hump will just sit here like that. Fill that up beautifully. Healthy bead of glue all the way around. There we go, got her all riveted in. Nice and sealed up all the way around. Put a coat of leftover rust paint I had on it, just to seal up any of the spots that were bare metal. And I put down some on the driver's side floorboard here because I had a little bit of surface rust starting. Looks pretty good. Ready for the carpet to go back in. Alright, carpet's laid down and the shifters are in. This is a brand new boot here because, as per usual, the bracket was cracked and broken. So I bought this one brand new. It was like 53 bucks, not too bad. I pulled the felt matting out from underneath the carpet here because this hump is quite a bit taller. Otherwise the stretch on the sides gets pretty unmanageable. For the holes, make sure to cut the hole in the carpet larger than the boots. Like there's these rubber boots that go underneath the plastic bracket to seal it so no water and dirt can get in. From the underside here you can see how this black rubber boot seals nicely against the sheet metal here all the way around. That bracket's pushing it down nice and tight. There's no carpet protruding out underneath it because you want that to be a nice seal here, because you'll get some splash coming up off the front wheel here. It'll come up, and if it can get into here, it'll get into your floor pan here underneath your carpet and soak your carpet and cause some rusting problems there, and you don't want that. So I just cut my holes just outside of the screw holes, Same thing with the main shifter hole on top of the trans hump there. I just used a nice fresh blade on the Olfa utility knife there. I'm just going to get a little bit of RTV silicone and put it around the bottom of these screws here, just to keep them from getting all rusted up. That way they'll come out nice and easy if I ever want them to down the road. Once the bottoms of these screws get all rusty, it can be really easy to strip out the heads of those screws or even break them off, so that's no fun. So yeah, come out pretty nice. You can see here from the underside, you can see my stainless rivets and my glue, see the underside of my transmission hump there. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. At the top here, where there's this black cover over the module there, the carpet kind of tucks underneath. Actually, I could kind of tuck that under there too now. The carpet tucks underneath that bracket there, and because this hump's taller, it goes up in a straight line, so I did have to trim a little bit off of the end of the carpet there where it slides underneath that bracket to give me some extra space. So alrighty, she is pretty much done. The seats are in, the trim is all back in. Had to move my trailer brake controller up because it used to be down where the T-case shifter is now, so I've moved it up to here. Way easier to reach now as well. When I'm sitting in the truck now, I don't have to reach very far to grab a hold of that. I just built a little bracket that goes underneath this fuse panel trim piece, so then I didn't have to put any holes in the dash, which is nice. I'm very, very pleased. Everything works. Reverse lights, the 4x4 and low range indicator lights, all of that work. I think I'm going to end up either putting a gauge into here, or I'm just going to make a little trim piece out of the same colored plastic. Maybe try to find a piece in the wrecking yard that I can glue over this. If I'm lucky, maybe even find a whole bezel that doesn't have the hole for the 4x4 switch. But either way, I'm quite pleased with the outcome of this swap. So yeah, let's go for a test drive. Alright, hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was able to help somebody out, or at least entertaining and educational for some of you. All considered, it's a lot less work than you might expect it to be if you've never done it before. Most everything kind of just bolts together. I got the swap done just in time for some nicer weather here. It's end of March here in Canada, so took the truck down to the car wash and gave it a good little wash off, because she was pretty dusty from sitting in the carport over the winter. I don't really drive the truck over the winter, so got her looking all nice and clean again. So yeah, hope everybody enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.